Okay, so we can start this by, we're going to do a lab on cylindrical mapping. I'm going to start by creating a cylinder just under polygons, hit cylinder, and it'll appear on your grid. And I've gone ahead and switched to two-sided, side-by-side layout with my UV editor here and my perspective view here. So here's my shape, and you'll see here that I've got my UVs, and that is just the default UV. What I want to do is I want to utilize the maximum amount of space in this UV texture editor box. And how I do that is I'm going to go to, I'm going to unwrap it, and I want to make sure that you guys all have toggle shaded UV display on. By default, it'll turn blue, your mesh. If not, it's just clear. So I want you to go ahead and click that on. So now let's start unwrapping this. I mean, there's a bunch of ways you can unwrap it, and there's right ways and there's wrong ways. The wrong way for a cylinder would to just run an automatic map. You get an object that ends up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different objects. So take a look here. That's a lot of seams to have to fix and make sure are all lined up correctly, because the automatic map just projects it. It runs basically what a planar map does, except from all directions simultaneously. So in this case, I want to go ahead to unwrap this correctly. I'm going to unwrap just the top and the bottom faces first, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to do a UV planar map, and if I run it on the x-axis and hit apply, you'll notice it's just sort of reading it along the x-axis, so you don't see anything in here. And if you do it on the z-axis, it does it across the z-axis, and you'll notice your little projection bounding box switches directions. And in this case, for this particular one, since it's going up and down, we need to project it from. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see it projects it from this direction, projecting down. And you'll see in here in your UV editor that you get this big, nice round circle. So we're going to do the same thing for the bottom. Go ahead and select just those faces, run the planar map, and you'll see that it turns red. Now the reason it's red is because it projected it from the top going down, which means in these faces, I just went to isolate mode, you'll notice that the object is black on one side and gray on the other. The black side is the side which the UVs cannot show a texture in a renderer, like a game engine or something. These would be some type of invisible glitch if you ever have gotten the camera into a weird angle where it's going through a wall, but you could still see through the wall and there's nothing behind there. That's what that is. So we need to go ahead and adjust that. So I'm going to exit isolate mode, and I'm going to select my using my move UV shell tool. I'm going to select my red circle here. I'm going to close out of my planar projection, and I'm just going to do polygons flip, and you'll notice it all turns blue, and now I can just move that out of the way. The last thing I need to do is I need to run a projection across the cylinders. So I need to do a UV cylindrical map, and here you'll notice that it's run straight across. I have no seams, and it's all one piece. Well, there's one seam, this edge to this edge, but that's the best we can do, only having one seam. So now the next thing is I need to get these all to fit in here, but I don't want any of my texture to look distorted. So I want to assign a new texture, assign a new material. In this case, I'll just do a Lambert. And under my Lambert 2, I'm going to hit my little checker box next to the color, and I'm going to hit checker. And now you'll see there should be a checker texture on it, but there isn't. If you press 4, that's wireframe mode. 5 is by default, just a shaded display, and 6 displays a texture. Now we want to make sure that all these textures first are, we want to make sure all these squares are the same size. So you'll notice that I have these squares along here around my cylindrical part. They're a little bit more stretched out than my top part. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that all these squares wrapped around my cylindrical object all are scaled to the same proportions as the top checkers and the bottom checkers. So these ones are a little bit further stretched out than these. So what I need to do is I need to unfold my object, and how I do this is I can just go polygons, just make sure you have them all selected using the Move UV Shell tool, polygons, and unfold. And you'll notice that the object becomes entirely unfolded, and by default the squares will all be uniformly scaled. Other things we can do to make this texture a little bit better is to scale it a little bit larger and try to maximize the amount of space we can use. A lot of times putting objects on an angle like this is the best way to maximize the amount of room you have in the square, because you get a little bit more room going from angle to angle. On objects such as this, it is really the best way to go about maximizing the usefulness of your UV texture square. Now, what I'll do next is I will place in each cylinder on both sides of my object, so now my UVs look something like this. And all of my squares are, I know, all the same size. So now if I were to go ahead and want to texture this, I could simply go and highlight all of my UVs using my Move UV Shell tool, go to Polygons, UV Snapshot, browse the folder that you would like to locate to and save to, and call this UV cylinder UV, or UV cylinder, and .tga. We need to include the extension in the save file when we name it. Go ahead and hit save, and then make sure your image format is a TGA, Targa. And 1024 is good. You could do a 2048. It really depends. For this example, 1024 is totally acceptable and fine. Go ahead and click OK. Now we can open up Photoshop. And we can open up that UV set that we just created. So UV cylinder, open. Okay, so I've got my UVs right here, and what I want to do is I want to bring in a couple images so I can texture it. So in this case, I'm going to have it look like a metal barrel, and what I'm going to do is simply take this image that I had sort of pre-photoshopped, and I'm going to paste it into my current image, and just simply resize it to sort of fit the shape of the circles on top and bottom. So turn that's pretty close. I want to get a little bit closer, so I'm going to do a warp. And start to get this to fit. And I'm just trying to get it to match my UV set so it's not inside, not too far inside where I'm going to get some of the black texture from the just default background. That's pretty close, and I'll make this 100, and it still is just slightly needs a few more tweaks to it. And I'm not going to make it perfect just so it fits the entire image, but close enough to retain a lot of that original information from the image, like the outer lip of the barrel. So that's pretty good. And now I will take that same image, duplicate it, and move it down to cover this cylindrical area. Something like so. And the last thing I need to do is rotate this image and place into fit. Once this is complete, I will apply a new material to my cylindrical object, and it will resemble a metal barrel of some type. Something like so. And I'm not going to make this one perfect at the moment right now, but just enough to at least show what I mean. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to save it out, metal barrel texture, okay, and here, and I want to save that out also not only as a Photoshop file, but also a Targa, TGA, and go ahead and hit save again. And I want to click, make sure I hit this 32 bits per pixel button, and now back in Maya, assign new material. In this case, I'll make it a blend because it's metal. I'll go to File, Open, and then locate the image. Now one thing you'll see here is that the texture appears here, but in my image here in my perspective plane, it's not showing anything. It's just you barely see the visible lines of the UV itself that we created earlier. So the reason that happens is because when you save out as a Targa, and this is the most common mistake people make, is once you change it to Targa, you need to make sure you click this Alpha Channels button and then go ahead and hit Save and Replace. And now go back into Maya and under the texture just hit Reload, and you'll notice it reloads just fine. So I got this really, really simple, basic looking metal barrel. That's all there is on this cylindrical mapping. So we've got just the base cylinder. We've matched up our checkerboards to make sure that they are all the same scale, to make sure we don't have any warping or distortion in our texture itself. And then we applied the texture to the object. That's all there is on cylindrical unwrapping and texturing.